There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is your mountain.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 60. I'm not used to saying the actual episode number, but I'm going to say it here. Episode 60 of the Your Mountain podcast. And I'm going to, full disclosure, going into this one. Everybody on this podcast is speaking from a different location. And I probably shouldn't say that, but just in case something goes wrong, I just want everybody to know we're trying this from all different locations.
Why didn't you want to come to my house?
I didn't know if you were actually going to make it home in time.
I know. I literally walked in the door like 10 minutes ago. Like I was on an airplane 2 hours ago. So
yeah. And I got to ask you about that.
Yeah.
Why in the world? So I know you went to Salt Lake City, right? You were at the National Governors Association. Why'd you fly?
Yes,
Why'd you fly? Why didn't you drive?
There are a lot of reasons.
Did you guys? But I lost you guys there. Sorry about that.
Oh, we're back. So yeah, we that was our guest. We will introduce in just a moment. But yeah, Dave asked, so why did I fly to Salt Lake instead of driving? Well, driving is about 7 hours when you calculate it all. Yeah. Well, I obey the speed limit, Dave, because I care about the law.
Since when?
I not being an attorney, I can't represent myself and be like, oh yeah, I have some really good legal reason for, bending the correct order of the universe to my personal whims like you. So I just do what's right, Dave. But anyway, the issue was, I had to be there early enough that if I was driving, I was going to have to start driving super early in the morning versus just getting up kind of early in the morning to fly. So it's kind of one of those things where you weigh what time you have to be there, and those extra 4 hours actually made a big difference in terms of being able to get there for a 10 a.m. meeting.
So I got to say, I kind of wish I hadn't asked that question. I was hoping for like a 2-sentence response, not a dissertation about your travel plans. So my fault, listeners. Sorry.
Well, you asked, Dave. I care.
I know.
I want to inform the people.
I should let everybody know. Okay, so Nephi's here. Mike is not here. We have no Mike McGrady today. But we have a guest that I think, no offense, Mike, but we have a guest that more than makes up for your absence. And really excited to have him joining us today.
The lovely and talented.
Is that a fair way to put it? Lovely? Sure. Yeah. Randy Newberg.
Your audience can't see me, so we can go with lovely, but that would be a stretch of the definition.
They've seen you before. I mean, anybody who's, unless you've been living, if you're a sportsman, you've seen people are familiar with your show. How long have you been on the air, and in what formats?
I've been at this for a while. Our first season of the old show, On Your Own Adventures, aired on Outdoor Channel in 2009. So since then, I've morphed to a different show called Fresh Tracks with Randy Newberg. And then in 2016, we took the full digital route, hard right to off the mainstream TV world, and ended up with podcasts and YouTube and Amazon Prime and everything else. So I've been at it for a while.
Yeah. So I was running through everything that you do. And I mean, between your show, between Fresh Tracks, between Elk Talk Live and Hunt Talk Radio and your hunttalk.com, your website and all the work you have to do there. And I believe recently you started Elk Talk podcast as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So my question is, where do you find time for your day job? Rumor has it you actually have a day job too.
Yeah, I have to have a day job so that I can afford to do all this stuff. People ask me what I do for a living. I say I disinherit the federal treasury. And when you say it that way, that you're a CPA, a tax accountant, you could have just insulted the person's grandmother. And when you tell them you disinherit the federal treasury, they'd buy you lunch anyhow.
Well, you're an accountant, so I want to know how you justify what you do.
I was going to say the same thing.
I don't know. I'm sitting here looking at a whiteboard in the studio I'm sitting in right now, and the only reason I can justify it is because I'm bullheaded and I'm pretty passionate about hunting and conservation, and it's fun to get up every morning and say, well, this is what I'm going to do today, and it's going to do something that fulfills the why of our platforms. So
I watch a ton of your stuff and have for a long time. So I just want to know if one of your goals was to just, you see a lot of different hunting shows and they run the gamut and kind of what they, how they share the experience. And do you just want people to know that it's okay to suffer? Was that the goal?
It's okay to suffer, and it's also okay to not fill every tag. Quick story. When I first started, I sent an episode to the network that didn't have a kill shot. And they warned me heavily against airing anything without a kill shot. I'm like, well, we had 3 episodes this year where I didn't kill something. Next year, I'll be lucky if we have 3 episodes if I do throw a tag. So you guys, if you want me on your network, you better get accustomed to a lot of these tags going unfilled. So I don't know. It's just, I am who I am, and I'm not anything special. I just have the cameras running and we capture whatever happens out there, and people see.
I think people appreciate it.
Do you think people?
Exactly.
Do you think it works for people because there are a lot of folks? I mean, present company excluded, but a lot of folks that don't fill their tags every year.
I think so. I think a lot of people have been stuck and missed a day of hunting because they tried to bust through a snowdrift and spent all day shoveling out, or they've had a family emergency that cut a hunt short, or they had weather show up that messed them up in some way. And so we just try to show those things. And I think people say, oh yeah, I've been there, done that. So it's fun
real.
to do it that way.
So it's real.
Yeah.
So what made you transition? Not even really transition, but what made you add on? Because I know you're also on the board of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, and in addition to having these platforms, so you just came off the board, but you've been on the board for a long period of time, right?
Yeah, 6 years.
Yeah, and you've been involved in a lot of advocacy work in throughout the West and in DC on public lands issues and hunting related issues. And what made you want to take that step? To go from, well, first of all, CPA and avid hunter to CPA, avid hunter, and host of all of these different mediums for sharing what you do, to then taking it to this next step of more advocacy.
That probably goes back to when I was 11 years old. When my parents divorced, I thought I wasn't going to be a hunter. Every mentor I knew in my little logging town of northern Minnesota, all 500 people, every person I knew was a hunter. And I so much wanted to be a hunter. And then, there's just complications when people get divorced, and I was the oldest. I'm like, oh man. Fortunately for me, I had public land right out my back door. So I could grab my 20 gauge and I could go shoot grouse, or I could go trap muskrats or whatever. And it wasn't until later that it dawned on me that without that public land, I probably would have not become a hunter. And when I moved to Montana in 1991, I got very involved in the advocacy of access on public lands and volunteered for, the normal nonprofit groups, Ducks Unlimited, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, all that. And then I was trying to create some way to make a bigger difference. And I got frustrated with some of the small nonprofit things that I was doing. They were great groups, but it was hard to make a difference in certain instances in the nonprofit world. So I started this, and the why, what drives this, is to promote self-guided public land hunting and to create advocates for that cause. And the hard part of that is the create advocates side of it. Because when you try to create advocates, someone's going to be mad at you. That's one constant to trying to create advocates. Somewhere, some way, that day, you're going to get at least one email where someone's not happy with you. But it's just what we do. So that's the 40 year, whatever story of how I got to today.
So, I was talking to one of our sister podcasts the other day, Ryan, Ryan Bronson.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So Ryan was talking about this issue, and he went off on a tangent where he was very upset with the whole public lands, private lands discussion. I think it was because, somebody was downplaying the fact that he hunts on private land. And I want to know if you've heard that and how do you address that? Because to be honest, I don't think that you or I or Dave would think that there's that one of these things is better than the other, but somehow people are getting hurt feelings about this. Like somebody saying like, well, how can you say you hunt here and I hunt there? And like, does that make you better than me? Or I think that you think that makes you better than me. Like, where does that come from? How do we avoid it?
I wonder about that. I encourage people, if you have access to private land, go for it. In my life as a CPA, I had so many ranch clients that I spent a lot of time hunting private land, and I don't make any apology for any of the hunting that I did on private land. And anyone who has a stigma about that, I say get over it. And if someone feels that the world is judging them because they hunt private land, I'd probably say get over that too, because I don't think the world is judging you, or if they are, heck with them. Go hunt your private land anyhow. It's kind of like, we do self-guided hunts. And so many people say, Randy, you're anti-outfitter. And I think to myself, where does that come from? Because I probably refer anywhere from 20 to 40 hunts a year to outfitters of people who get a hold of me. I'm not at all anti anything. I'm just using these platforms to create some voice for public lands through the mechanism of people out there hunting on their own. So that would be disappointing if Ryan feels that people are hacking on him because of that.
Oh, I think it's more of like we have a mutual friend, Kyle, and he says the same thing. He wants to get rid of hyphenated hunting. He's like, how do we avoid, because I don't think that, the guys I know, nobody does that on purpose. Nobody's trying to divide the community.
No.
But unfortunately, like, man, honestly, it creeps in there where somebody joins and they're like, oh, I am this type of hunter. I am that type of guy. And, I don't do that other thing. And I think, it's something I think we all have to be very careful of, is that our personal preferences don't turn in, there's not an intention of elitism, certainly for me, and I don't think for most people, but I think it's something to guard against. Is like, just because Dave hates binoculars, that doesn't mean that the way Dave hunts is wrong. It just means
that's because my eyes are binoculars. I've got great vision, and I only need to see 50 yards ahead of me.
I think in any sector of our society, we have a tendency to think our personal preferences, and I don't care if it's I shoot a compound versus a recurve or whatever. We tend to think our own preferences are the right way you're supposed to do it. I think that's just part of the human condition. But I think, Nephi, when you say we got to guard against that, I would agree. I hope anyone listening to this podcast or who follows my stuff, when they hear me advocating for public lands, it's not anything against private land, because I put myself in the picture of use Texas. You are not going to hunt in Texas unless you have access to private lands. And if I lived in Texas, as much as I love to hunt, I'd find a way to get access to private land. And that would just be part of the dynamic I had to deal with. And boy, anyone who's that narrow-minded that thinks someone hunting private land or someone who goes with an outfitter is this or that, I say get over yourself.
It's funny.
It's not just Texas. It's not just Texas either. It's this is a constant refrain that we say on this podcast, but 70% of the land in this country managed by private landowners. If hunting were limited, or the only way you could hunt, to do it the right way meant you had to be a do-it-yourself public land hunter, and that was the only way to legitimize the practice and be viewed as a legitimate hunter, we'd be cutting millions of people out of
we'd be down the tubes.
I mean, it's asinine in my opinion. I mean, we've got some incredible public land opportunities for sure, but there's a lot. I did a turkey hunt on private land this year, and I didn't get a turkey. It's not like that's not an easy. It's not. You can blame me if you want, Nephi. Yeah, you can blame me if you want, Nephi. There were turkeys around for sure, but my point is, it was a hard hunt. I mean, it was a really hard hunt. We covered lots and lots of miles. It's not a sure thing, So, I kind of fall in that camp of it's silly to pit the community against each other over something as silly as, do you hunt on private land or public land?
Well, and I think
we should just be glad that people are out there hunting.
Absolutely. And I think what's funny, Randy, I think that I bet we're almost all the same. If we live in the West, I know for me, like a lot of my upland game hunting and things like that, we live in Cheyenne. And so it's, basically we're kind of in the Midwest-ish where our homes are, but then we're also in a state where a lot of my big game hunting is almost all, it's national forest, it's BLM. And so you kind of learn to, appreciate both sides. You appreciate building relationships with ranchers and with locations along, the quote unquote front range where you can get out and do something quickly. And then you also appreciate the opportunities to go out and plan that, 5-day hunt in the, someplace further out in the backcountry. So.
I mean, my son loves to waterfowl hunt. And when he comes home over the holidays, a friend invites us out on his private place, and that's where we do our waterfowl hunting. And I'm not going to apologize to anyone over that. I live in a state where 2/3 of Montana is private land. And if we didn't have great private land stewards, if we didn't have access to those private lands, we wouldn't have near the conservation successes we have, and we would have very, very crowded, far more crowded public lands. So to me, it's hunting. Go do it.
Yeah, need it all. Let me ask you about the public land side, though, because I know you're very passionate about public land hunting. And you said that you're trying to create advocates around public land issues. So this is a 2-part question. And the first part is, what made you decide in particular that these public land issues were so important to you? I know you talked about how you got into the advocacy a little bit, but specifically the public land issues. So that's part 1. And then part 2 is, what do you think the most impactful environmental law is out there that you with respect to our public lands?
Sure. The first part's the easy one.
Yeah, that's why I led with it.
For me, like I said, going back to the story of how I grew up hunting, if I didn't have public land out my back door, I wouldn't have been a hunter. And it wasn't just me. A lot of young hunters I grew up with, it was the same thing. We hunted public land. And part of where I got into it, and this is the CPA business side of it, when I started these platforms, I did the analysis, and in the West, 70% of hunters primarily hunt public land. And I looked at how many media platforms even gave lip service to public lands, and it was 0 out of the 400 platforms I looked at. And I thought, well, there's an opportunity to maybe be effective in talking about how valuable these public lands are for hunting. I'd worked on many land trades for the 20 years or 15 years prior to starting these platforms, and access has always been a big deal to me. I don't know. They're just, to me, public lands are uniquely, maybe not uniquely American, but the idea of having something for everybody is very unique, and it's very much present in the in all of the United States. And so I just have a strong connection to how the public lands have benefited me, and that's kind of what got me into the whole idea of advocating for public lands. The second part about what is the most impactful. So, Dave, are you talking impactful from a positive way or a negative way?
It can be either one, or maybe both. Maybe you've created a second question there, and you could bifurcate it. Most impactful, positive and negative.
Yeah, you attorneys in that term bifurcated. Yeah. I didn't know what that term means.
No one else knows what it means.
And then I heard one of my instructors at continuing education kept using the term bifurcated. I had to go look it up. I'm like, when you want to split one item into two. All right. Okay.
Well, thank you for explaining it to everybody for us then. I apologize for doing that.
60 episodes. No one knows what it means, but now they do.
I've been saying it all along, and they're like, oh, man, this Wilms guy, I don't understand a thing he says.
I could probably make a case for so many environmental laws as being one or the other. I guess when I think about environmental, I have a hard time drawing a state boundary as kind of the scope of an environmental or landscape issue. So it causes me to focus more on federal ones. Probably the one that I see that I'm going to make them a tie, just at their absolute basic root of the fundamental components of good habitat is clean air and clean water. I have Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act. I remember as a kid, I'm quite a bit older than you guys, so I can say this, but people didn't have unleaded gasoline. And you would go to even a modest-sized city, and the amount of smog and everything else was really, really bad. I remember reading news reports of how the Great Lakes had died growing up in Minnesota. The smelt are dying, the lake trout are dying, and people didn't have to change their behaviors that much to really make a big impact. So probably what I've seen over my 54 years, those are probably the two that were most impactful from a beneficial standpoint. From another standpoint, you guys probably know what I'm going to say, and that's the Endangered Species Act. I see how it's been weaponized or cannibalized, whatever you want to call it, in a manner that its tentacles go everywhere. And one of the outcomes is a high level of frustration by people who trusted our institutions and trusted our policies and trusted the agreements that we all came to, only to have the small little fissures of the ESA and associated legislation as tools that other groups can use to create havoc among the masses.
I want to jump in because I really love both of those that all three of those that you mentioned. As Dave knows, like the Clean Water Act, nothing's cooler than that. But I think what's unique when you mentioned those, the first thing that came to my mind is the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. Most people don't know that those are actually, they're in many ways collaborative with the states, where the federal government, had an overarching ideal, for example, the Clean Water Act to restore the chemical, physical, biological integrity of our nation's waters. That's verbatim. But in order to do that, they reach out and they hold hands with the states and those state agencies, and they gave some loose guidelines. This is the direction you need to go. And then those individual state departments of environmental quality or natural resources or whatever they might be, then go in and implement custom tailored solutions to get to work on those things on the ground to be able to get to that larger overall goal. And I just think that is absolutely the way to do it. And trusting the states as partners in those efforts is, I think critical. And I think that's unique because I think it somewhat contrasts with some of the challenges of the Endangered Species Act. And Dave, you can tell me when I'm wrong, but in the Endangered Species Act, I don't feel like whether it's through the way that the act is written. I'm not saying it's the agency's fault, meaning U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but it seems like there's been more of a reluctance or an inability to trust states as partners in the on-the-ground implementation of the ESA, like there had been with the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act. And that's just an outside perception, and it's pretty wonky, but I think it's kind of unique.
Yeah, so I'm not, Nephi, you're going to have to stop me because the ESA is something I tend to get really, really wonky on. For those that don't know, I teach a graduate level class at the University of Wyoming on the Endangered Species Act.
You can go listen to 3 of our previous podcasts for the entire class.
Yeah, so I'll go down a gigantic rabbit hole. Yeah, you won't save a lot of money. It's one of the most affordable public education institutions in the country.
I'm just
anybody
saying,
out there is looking for a place to go,
you don't want to take the class.
University of Wyoming. No, that's why you'll want to take the class. Yeah. So without diving in too deep, I think you can break the ESA can be broken into a couple of components, pretty easily, as far as what's really good about it and where are the challenges about it. Right. And, there are things about the ESA that work really, really well, as in, almost two things in particular. Nearly every species that's been listed is still with us today, never gone extinct. And on the flip side, when a species is delisted, there's not a single species that's been delisted due to recovery that's gone back on the list. So there's a process there that works when it works. And that's where there's the challenges in the act, right? Because there are places where it's just not working, where you have some species. There are more than 36 species. You hear talk about wolves and grizzly bears and the charismatic species. There are more than 36 species that are listed that have met recovery objectives for a significant period of time and should be delisted, but aren't. And they aren't because other parts of the act have been weaponized in a way that resources are sucked away from the agency and put into defending these other types of issues. And it keeps the agency from being able to move forward with delisting, which should be the goal. We should celebrate recovery. So that's the really short version of,
and wolves are a great example.
Agreeing.
And wolves are a great example. Wolves, those populations that were listed, the way they were listed, they're recovered. And I don't know, Randy, is there, I don't know if you want to go down a rabbit hole of talking about some of the species level stuff that you've worked on or not, in talking about policy, or if you just assume what's your thought? Do you want to go there?
Yeah, I'll go there.
You've been active and impactful in the wolf debate for decades.
Yeah, in the wolf side. And what got me into the wolf gig, well, a couple things. One, where I grew up in northern Minnesota, wolves were never absent. I grew up when I was a kid listening to them across the river. And so I always thought, well, they're just another animal on the landscape. You can live with them. They're not Little Red Riding Hood. But probably where I really got my indoctrination to the ESA is in 1998. Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming were asked to meet and spend almost 3 years working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to craft the Greater Yellowstone Grizzly Bear Recovery Strategy, the conservation strategy. And our governor, Mark Roscoe, at the time, somehow decided, I guess Randy Newberg will represent the hunters of Montana. So 5 from Montana, 5 from Idaho, 5 from Wyoming. We spent 3 years meeting around those 3 states every quarter and getting the full, if you want to call it, crash course on grizzly bear populations, grizzly bear research, and how all of that could fit within the confines of the Endangered Species Act, with the intention that at some point in time, recovery would be met and management authority would be handed to the states. That was a learning experience of the highest degree for me to really understand the complexities of the ESA, why it's in place, with a very low producing, a slow reproductive rate species like grizzly bears. It had the unique feature that the grizzly bears are broken into 5 distinct population segments. And this one, the Greater Yellowstone segment, has a robust population. And even at that time, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service knew that they were reaching recovery goals and that it was only going to be a short period before they would issue their delisting ruling. So I spent a lot of time on that committee, took it very seriously. We had public comments. We would all sit there through the public meetings. All of our meetings were held in public. And you got to hear a lot of perspectives of people who were impacted or would be impacted by the management strategies that were put in place. So that was really, really interesting to me. And then shortly thereafter, I think it was 2001, Montana started putting together its wolf recovery plan or management plan because we'd reached our delisting criteria when all 3 states met it. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service says, all right, now come up with your wolf plan. So I was involved in that. And then through the next 10 years of litigation on wolves, unfortunately, was way more involved than I wanted to be. And then we ended up having to legislatively through Congress seek delisting. And that had its share of craziness to it. So yeah, I've had enough servings of ESA issues as it relates to wolves and grizzly bears that if I don't have to eat any more ESA salads, I'd be happy.
Well, I'd say,
by the way.
I'd say that I would. You're going to be making a couple more trips to that salad bar on grizzly bears before all said and done.
And yeah, I mean, nobody's affected by the grizzly bear side of it more than you folks in Wyoming. But at some point in time, we're going to have to address the northern continental divide population segment in northern Montana, northwest Montana. And that, again, is another very robust population that is expanding far beyond what its stated recovery goals are, both in terms of geography, in terms of the total number of bears, the number of females on the landscape, the females with cubs, all of every reporting criteria, both in the Greater Yellowstone subpopulation and in the Northern Rockies population. We have exceeded the population or the objectives required under the ESA and under the listing findings. We're well beyond that in all of those. So how are we going? That's a challenge for us as a society or as communities, as states. How do you handle the process when you probably have a piece of legislation that's more built for recovery than it is for management and delisting and a path going forward of relative abundance?
Although I would say that here's where one of the problems is with the act, right? Because that statement you said is true the way it seems to be applied today, but the way the act was written and the way it was intended, it's a 2-part act. It is to prevent extinction and to recover the species to the point that listing is no longer required. And so prevent extinction and delist. Those are the, and you could add a third purpose. So prevent extinction, recovery, delist. That's the purpose. That was the express purpose. We don't want them on the list. We want to do things to prevent them from getting there. But if they get there, we want to get them recovered and off the list as soon as possible. One of the problems I've seen is that the standard that the courts apply to on the listing side versus the delisting side seems to be, although it's supposed to be the same standard, it seems to be applied differently. And I'd say it this way: on the listing side, the courts tend to defer to the agency's decision on whether or not to list a species. There's a great deal of deference afforded the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which is the way it's supposed to be. On the delisting side, it seems like there's far less deference afforded to the Fish and Wildlife Service for its decision to delist. And judges tend to meddle a little bit more. And I hate to use the word activism in the judicial context, but there just seems to be
That's a
a
great
slightly different standard applied on the delisting side than on the listing side. My takeaway from my review of a lot of these cases over the years.
I would agree. You're a little more polite than I would have been.
You know, I actually think this segues nicely into a question I wanted to ask you, Randy, and I think it's important. You know, these seminal acts that I think were well intentioned, including the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, NEPA, the Endangered Species Act, that came about at a time of unity when some would say that we had moved past partisanship, that it didn't matter whether someone was a Democrat or Republican on these issues when those bills were passed. You know, they've since been weaponized. And so they're being used by a group, you know, groups of individuals for reasons both political and otherwise, for reasons that they weren't intended. I mean, is that fair?
I believe it's very fair. I'm on record in a lot of places saying that the wolf is not a canine, it's a bovine, a cash cow to some of these groups that have weaponized the Equal Access to Justice Act, weaponized the ESA and all that other stuff. I think there's a huge danger, and I get frustrated when I see it happening. If I could say it on our side, I don't like to say it this side or that side, but I've at times seen it happen in some of the groups I affiliate with, and I'm like, hey, folks, come on, you know, we can't politicize this, we can't weaponize it. This is about conservation. Normally has been party agnostic or party apolitical, whatever you want to call it. And I think as our society is maybe changing and becoming more of a, you know, I'm on this side or I'm this team.
Yeah, polar.
It makes it harder to have these kind of discussions and try to talk about changes that are necessary. As quick as you say, there are some changes needed to the ESA, which I don't know how you can say that. David, when was the ESA passed?
1973.
73, okay.
From introduction to signature, it took 4 months, by the way. From introduction to get through the House, the Senate, conference committee, and signature of the president, it took either 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, and so I struggle to say that there's a piece of legislation that's 46 years old that is perfect today, the same as it was 46 years ago. But as quick as you say, you know, there's some things that could be changed to make this better. There are some unintended consequences that maybe nobody saw, and we need to have discussions about those. You can't even have the discussions without being labeled this or that or something else. And a lot of groups will instantly grab those headlines or those points and try to raise some money over it. It's frustrating.
So you want to know one of the wonky, this is a funny in a lawyer wonky, funny kind of way with the ESA. So the ESA was passed in 73. So Nephi will tell me, stop being so wonky. Nobody wants to hear you talk about this. But the ESA was passed in 73. It was actually amended a few times. What's the wonky funny is one of the biggest issues we have in the ESA today, and I think you've alluded to it, but didn't hit it square on because we didn't really go that way. But it was, you know, the sue and settle tactics of mass petitioning for species listings, and then settling in the court, and it sort of peels away the resources of the agency, and then you have a few groups dictating agency priorities over other things. That only came about because of amendments that we made to the act in 1982. So I just think that's kind of
humor right there.
That's attorney humor. Like we tried to fix, we made a couple of amendments to the act. I think it's funny. We tried to make some amendments to the act to fix what we saw as perceived problems in 78 and 82. And those amendments actually turned into, more problems. But the point is, we identified problems in the past, and we were willing to take a chance and try and fix them. And if that fix didn't work, we'd go back and try and figure out a way to fix that and make it work. We haven't touched the act in any substantive way since 1988. So we've been, even though we continue to have this body of evidence suggesting that it's not working as intended. And even some of the attempts we made to fix it maybe made some of the problems worse. Some made some things better, made some things worse, created new problems. We haven't come back to fix it because we're so divided along partisan lines that nobody's willing to take it on and have a substantive conversation about, okay, how do we address humans are fallible, and how do we address this, a potential language mistake that we made, almost 40 years ago, and make it work better.
So finishing shifting gears here, like here's what's interesting. I think we talked about the axe being weaponized in new ways. And Randy, you mentioned, that, there is a general polarization that it's occurring right now. And I don't think it's just here. I think it's a trend that's, unfortunately aided by technology. But do you ever worry about or think about how as sportsmen, because I'll tell you, this is a personal fear that I have, is that as sportsmen, us being, this group of sportsmen that, being weaponized themselves, about us being turned, somebody trying to inappropriately, use our group. And I'll tell you, kind of what kind of hits home with me about that is I think, and, with all due respect to good friends who have espoused this idea that as sportsmen, somehow we have to make this choice between parties because we have to choose as sportsmen. I mean, and I reject this. We have to, we can either like habitat or we can like the Second Amendment, but we can't like both. We're going to have to choose between one or the other. And we're going to have to choose our candidates by saying this guy's either good on guns or good on conservation. And if we want one, we don't get the other. And it really bothers me to hear that because I believe it is a false choice. And I think in buying into that, I think we're in danger of being exploited. And as a sportsman, that's something that worries me.
Worries me too. I see it, and it frustrates me to no end because then we're just playing into the hands of the people that would benefit from this binary. You got to be one or the other. There's a bumper sticker. I don't know if you've ever seen it in Wyoming, but there's a bumper sticker that floats around here in Montana. It says "Gay hippie loggers for Jesus," and every time
we don't have that bumper sticker.
Every time I see it, I laugh. I'm like, that person stands for just about everything. That's cool. They're identifying what they're for instead of trying to say, oh, because of this, I'm against it, or I can only have one or the other. Yeah. I'm probably as absolutist as you're going to find on the Second Amendment. So a lot of people think, oh, you got to be some, far over on this side. But I'm also a huge advocate for clean air, clean water, and wise use of our resources. So then I get lumped over on that side. And I've found that one of the pleasures of having the platforms I have, and I used to say I was party agnostic. Now I'm anti-party. I think I've went from party agnostic to anti-party. I have no use for political parties. Zero, none. And it really gets easy to advocate for what's important to you and your audience when you really don't care about the political team playing or partisanship or whatever you want to call it. And I feel I get way more accomplished by focusing on the issue rather than the who or, there might be someone who introduces a bill that I disagree with, but I agree with them on 8 other bills. So it's about the issue and the topic. It's not about what party they're from and everything else. But I also say that we as the hunting community are a cross-section of our greater society. And as our society becomes more polarized, I expect that our community will follow that same trend. Whether I like it or not, I have to accept that and figure out how to work within that.
So I want to build off of that, but I got to circle back to one thing first, all the way back to your answering the question about the most impactful environmental law. I got to admit, I was actually kind of surprised as a public land advocate that you didn't mention Federal Land Policy and Management Act. And only for the reason that because that's, in my view, that's the law that gave us the public lands as we know them today, and kind of said we're no longer going to be using the Homestead Act. These lands are off the market; they're everybody's now.
Yeah, that one entered my mind, as did Pittman-Robertson, and as did the Migratory Bird Act. But I
so many to choose from, right?
You asked me one, and I actually picked two. I picked three, so I almost cheated as it was. But no, I think that act is. I go back and read a lot of that when I'm trying to figure out how did we get to where we are today. And another one that had entered my mind was the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Yeah. How long of a podcast do you?
So,
interestingly enough, you can go back and listen to former podcasts that we've done. You're going to get every one of those issues.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
So not you, Randy. I'm just telling you, everyone else, you should go back and listen to every one of the episodes we've ever done and give it a 5-star rating. That's for everybody except you, Randy. I know you're busy, so I'm homework for everyone else.
No, Randy should go do that too.
Good.
He doesn't have to listen, but that 5-star rating is important.
And then we'll have 3 listeners.
But
180 total downloads.
In more of a pragmatic application of what you had said there, Nephi, when you just think about gun ownership, okay, when you say I'm very fond of the Second Amendment, I own a lot of firearms, there are some people who will instantly paint you as this person or that person. But nothing is ever as simple as what it seems on the surface. And you think about how much of our conservation funding in this country happens because of not just hunters, but mostly recreational shooters. So there's times I'll run into hunters who will complain about something. Oh, well, they don't hunt, I'm like, well, yeah, but they're recreational shooters and they're funding about 2/3 or 70% or whatever of the Pittman-Robertson. So it's my point of just bringing that up, that maybe both of our audiences really can relate to, and as a tangible example in their life. Even there, it's not as clear or as cut and dried as we want to make it. The more we simplify it, the greater the likelihood that we're probably not thinking about it that hard.
Yeah, I actually, of course, just you're preaching to the choir, and Dave's heard that spiel 1,000 times from me. It's actually 80%. And the thing that I love about bringing it up and sharing with people is because it's not just hunters that don't know that sport shooters, target shooters, and grandma buying a revolver is paying into conservation. It's the other way too. And I actually really, really enjoy talking to sport shooters who don't know that they are contributing to conservation. So because they don't have any idea and you start talking about, what about elk hunting? Well, what about, these types of habitat, ducks, these things, it hasn't occurred to them. And most of them are absolutely blissfully unaware that they are helping to ensure the future of wildlife and habitat in this country through what they are doing. And I think a lot of those people, if once they know about it, I mean, this is just a hope for me, they're more likely to then participate in it. They're more likely to say, I think maybe I want to be a hunter too. And because I know a ton of those people. They have the skill set, they have the capability, and I just like to bring those people over too. And I think that, by trying to bridge that gap, I think we do great things for the future of hunting, fishing, and the shooting sports in this country by making everybody aware that, if you hunt, if you shoot, you actually care about conservation. You didn't know you did, but you're funding it. And if you hunt, you better care about these other issues too, because that's driving conservation in this country and driving the North American model, about 50% of it. And so I think it's a great opportunity to, pat each other on the back and walk down the yellow brick road together.
Can I ask you guys, I know you guys are the host, but can I ask you guys a question?
Yeah. You can ask Dave.
All right. So you both worked for a governor at one time. Do you feel that a lot of people almost in today's world and how political access and processes happen, do you think that a lot of people have just said, you know what, as much as I don't want to do this, I almost have to pick a side if I'm going to have any impact?
I've got an answer, but I'll let Dave answer first.
No, go ahead, Nephi.
I'm going to be honest, and I think that the people who are truly, I think that we've gotten lazy. That's my personal opinion. I don't think that people are picking a side because they want to have an impact, so therefore they pick a side. I think it's become way too easy and to tunnel into and find groups of people who are exactly like-minded to you. And I think that I believe that is a huge problem. And I think it's something that we need to recognize the problem and seek to overcome. And I'll use this as an example. I know there's people in my neighborhood, and I'm kind of guilty of it, who don't have any idea who their neighbors are. And that's the case all across this country now. People in neighborhoods who, like, you used to have neighborhood picnics, you'd meet people around you, and you'd realize there's a lot of things that you agree on, and there's a bunch of stuff, and there's some things that you don't. And that was okay, because you're still neighbors and you still can be friends. And the fact that he likes the Red Sox and you like the Yankees, you can still be buddies. And I think that in the world today, and I'd say in our country, it's far too easy right now for me to find a group of the hodgepodge, crossbow hunters of the Upper Wickahatchee, and for that to be all of my friends, to belong to a group of people that think basically exactly like I think, and to then put yourself in a bubble. And I think this is something this is deep, but we're okay with the fact that a corporation is now tunneling us information that plays into that. So like our Facebook feed, to take an example, is giving you information from things that are through an algorithm designed to appease exactly, to tell you exactly what you want to hear, to introduce you to friends who think like you think. And it's lazy. It really is lazy. And then your facts become whatever the community speak is for that group. Your tolerance for other ideas starts to go away. And I think that, at the root of it, we all, at least like Alcoholics Anonymous, we all have to recognize that this is a problem and say, you know what? I refuse to be part of this problem. I'm going to listen to people and have friends who have views like mine and friends who have different views too, and find consensus and find ways where we can work together. And that's my opinion. I don't think it's people having to make a choice. I think it's simplicity and laziness. That's what I think.
Yeah. So mine's a lot shorter answer than that. It's mostly the same as what Nephi said, but I don't think that folks, I don't think folks feel like they have to pick a side. Well, I take that back. I do, but I think that's the way our country has been since its founding. We've been a three party system basically since the founding of the country, and people have felt for 200 plus years that in order to get something done, you have to pick a side, and that there's power in numbers that way. And I just think it's just a continuation of our history. But I do think the bigger systemic problem, and what I noticed a lot through the governor's office, is that by doing that, by picking those sides, like Nephi said, you shut yourself off to the other side, and you don't realize how much you actually have in common, and you paint them as an enemy rather than a friend, or an enemy rather than a collaborator. And I think that's a problem, because what I found during that time is when you got people from different, that picked different sides, politically speaking, and you got them in a room together, at first they were very cautious. They kept their guard up, but the longer you had them in that room together, the more they found a lot of common ground. And so I think that's where there's not enough of that reaching across the aisle, so to speak, but just being neighborly, reaching across across the street, reaching across party affiliation, truly hearing what the other side is saying and having a respectful conversation.
Well, this conglomeration of issues, that's part of it too, which is that, we've taken.
But I want to know what Randy thinks. He posed the question. I want to know what Randy thinks.
Dave and I will argue later.
What I think is that we Americans, we've grown so busy. Maybe it's lazy, maybe it's whatever. I think there's a convenience in letting somebody, and this is a bad way to say it, but I am going to say it. There's a convenience in letting someone else do our thinking for us. I know there's a complex issue. Tell me in 2 sentences what I should think about it. And I see that as kind of the root of it. I do think that the platforms and tribal opportunities we have today results in a lot of echo chambers. I think of some of the longest friends I've had are situations where I've had to sit on a committee or a council or participate in something where at first it was like you were describing, David. We all knew kind of what our backgrounds were, and there wasn't a lot being spoken amongst us. And after about 2 or 3 days on that council or that committee, pretty soon it's like, you know what? That person, they've got a pretty funny story. Their life experiences are pretty interesting to hear. And over that time, you start learning that, hey, everybody's lens of any issue is formed by your life experiences. And once you accept that and realize none of us are going to have the same life experiences, how do I learn from that person's life experience rather than judge from that person's life experience? For me, anyhow, it seems like it's a lot easier to think about things rather than to rush to conclusions on things. But I worry that we as a society have found ourselves to be so busy, so strapped for any time that it's a habit we can fall into to say, I subscribe to this newsletter and today they said that the earth is flat. So today I guess the earth is flat. So that's a simplified accountant's view of it.
That's the first time I've heard an accountant say anything was simple.
Well, we got to make it more complicated than it needs to be. That's the only way we can make any money. That's why we talk in these foreign languages. No one else wants to talk to them. So,
little secret lawyers do the same thing.
I know that.
That's why we use words like bifurcate.
We need to go on a hunting trip together someday, and we can tell accountant and attorney jokes to each other, and no hard feelings.
That would probably be good. I don't know. Nobody's ever said an attorney joke to me. He says,
I've got one.
In all sarcasm.
Yeah. Okay. The only downside about you attorneys is that 99% of them give the other 1% a bad name.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I know.
Go, Dave.
Yeah. Yeah, we've got that.
A good attorney. That was very kind of him. That 99% number, that's not good accounting.
I'm trying to the one I always like is, what's the difference between a dead snake in the road and a dead lawyer in the road? It's the skid marks in front of the snake.
I've not heard that one.
So I've always kind of liked that one.
Next time I'm an expert witness and they put me on the stand, I'm going to say, Your Honor, can I tell a joke first?
Yeah, just don't give credit. No credit to where you heard it.
Randy, one of the things I respect most about you is I feel like these battles, I think, what you talk about, whenever I get together, we talk about, this type of stuff. I feel like you've been through the battles, you've been in the trenches, and, implicitly when we think I think of like, oh yeah, these issues of like, how do we overcome partisanship? How do we avoid it? Why is it bad? It's like just intuitively, and I don't mean to make you feel old. Like you get it. You've been there, you've been through the battles. And I think that's some of the groups that, you and I are both active with, some of the challenges I feel like are, you have youth that haven't been through those battles, that don't understand, the tools necessary, and then and all these lessons. And so how do you learn that, or how do you share that, or how do you, how do you bring, what's your advice, and what do you do to try and bring those people within your sphere to share that knowledge of how to actually get work done, and not just be, a loud, angry, lone voice in the wilderness?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot on my platforms. And the first thing I always tell people is, to gain the experience and wisdom, you better just brace yourself that you're going to make a lot of mistakes along the way. And there's times you're going to look like a fool. The old saying, you don't know what you don't know. That is so true a lot of times. And it's really embarrassing when you find out, I didn't know that. or you trusted somebody who, well, they seem like an expert and I'm kind of busy today, I'll take their word for it. And you find out maybe they had an agenda. So one, just accept that nobody has the answers to all this. And it's not like you're going to go to a 12-step course and when you get out, they're going to give you a little pamphlet to say, here's how to engage in this stuff intelligently and effectively. The other part of it, I always say that for conservation, every conservation project or conservation event or policy that I think people look at as being positive, there's 3 common traits to that. It's never easy. It's never comfortable. It's always uncomfortable. Someone's going to be mad at you. And it's always inconvenient. It's not like we get to put it on our calendar that, on January 10th, there's going to be this opportunity or this threat. No, it just happens. And people who lead rise to that event and somehow find the time or the way or the ability to do what has to be done when they have to. I always ask people, well, what if Pittman and Robertson, when they passed that act, what if they said, I'm probably going to get some flack over this. I'm just not going to do that. Or pick any project in your backyard that maybe is a conservation access or whatever it might be. What if someone said, that's too hard. That's going to take 3 years to get done. I don't have the stomach for it. So I just try to tell people that this is a learning process. Be careful about what you don't know and accept that some people are going to be upset, that it's going to be difficult, and you're going to be asked to do things at times when there's probably something else you'd rather be doing. And if you keep it that, look at it and understand it with those expectations, you just learn over time. And hopefully eventually people become good advocates for the cause and their energy is channeled in a positive way, because I caution people that there's a fine line between passion and emotion. And when passion becomes emotion, you lose all your effectiveness. And someday down the road, you're going to look back on that and say, man, I got a little out of hand there. So
I got one more question for you about advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
This is my last major question before our very last question we want to ask you, but our last sort of substantive. What was that, Nephi? Did you say something?
No, I did not. I just slapped my head.
I was laughing.
Oh, okay. Okay. So on the advocacy front, here's what I'd pose to you. And this is a question about the future of hunting. But in the past several episodes of our podcast, we've talked about a bill that's been introduced in Congress that would ban importation of wildlife parts from Africa. We've talked about a bill that would ban grizzly bear hunting once grizzly bears are delisted. That's been introduced in Congress. We've talked about the challenges to having Sunday hunting prohibitions lifted. We've talked about proposals to end trapping on public lands or other places, or all-out bans on trapping. We've talked about proposals from legislatures around the country to ban wildlife contests, and other things along those lines. Basically, we've had a lot of conversations about pieces of legislation that incrementally prohibit some type of hunting activity. And my question to you is, I'm interested in your thoughts about those, and what do bills like this mean for the future of hunting, and how do we ensure that we have a future for hunters and anglers in this country?
Well, I'm a strong believer that you get what you deserve either through your actions or inactions. And I love to trap. I grew up trapping, and I see those things related to trapping, and it bothers me. But I will say this: the trappers have been under attack for 40, 50 years, and they have developed a game that they show up. It's part of the creed, if you're a trapper, that you're going to engage. Percentage-wise, I would say trappers have the highest percentage of engagement of anybody. And when you look at the amount of attacks against them and how much ground they've been able to maintain with such a small representative part of our population, it's quite impressive to me. And I look at the hunting community and our representation of people who are willing to engage, to advocate, to testify, to go to a hearing, to even send an email or make a phone call is much smaller. And I don't know how much ground hunting needs to lose or has to lose before the hunting community starts realizing that just buying a license is no longer enough. You have to be an advocate, or you are going to get what was coming to you. And I know a lot of people wish it was different. I hear people say, well, I send my $25 to this organization. That's what I do. Well, it's good that you send that $25 because those organizations need membership numbers when they show up to advocate for our cause. But there's nothing that beats a personal relationship that you might have with your county commissioner, or your state legislator, or your congressional delegation, or whoever it is. And how often have we heard somebody complain about a policy action, a law, a piece of legislation, whatever it might be, and you say, well, did you attend a hearing? Did you make a phone call? Did you contact anybody? And the answer is, well, that doesn't matter. That never makes any difference. They're going to do what they're going to do. Well, part of the reason that they're going to do what they're going to do is because the other side showed up and we didn't. And so I am optimistic, though, that hunting has a bright future in that there's so many positives to it. If we just show up, if we decide that we're going to let our voice be heard, because we all have a story to tell. Every community has a story to tell. And if you don't tell your own story the way that you want it told, someone's going to tell it for you. And very seldom does that other group tell your story in the positive light that it deserves.
I'm just letting that soak in for a second. I agree. I agree with you. I don't know what Nephi's thoughts are on this.
If I could,
the only thing I'd add. Oh yeah, please do. Yeah.
And I use this as an example. One of my friends in Colorado is a big advocate. He spends so much time on issues, and he showed up at 2 open houses for wild sheep conflict, grazing, and other things. And he's a big advocate for wild sheep and separation between domestic and trying to reduce disease. At those open houses in very large cities in Colorado, he was the only person there who represented the hunting community. And I'm like, wow, that's if Colorado ends up with decisions about sheep that are not favorable to sheep, it's because nobody showed up.
So that's amazing. I hadn't heard that story before. We have decent attendance in Wyoming, I would say, from the sportsman's community. We could always use more. I think you're right. One of the other things that I'd add on to that, and I'd be interested in your thought on this, but sometimes one of the biggest threats to the hunting community is the hunting community itself, not just from not showing up, but from infighting.
Yeah.
This circles all the way back to Nephi's point at the beginning of public land hunting versus private land hunting, but it goes to things like, traditional bow versus recurve versus crossbow, and muzzleloader seasons versus rifle seasons, and all those, and point restrictions, and all of the disputes we have internally amongst our own community, I think is another threat towards the future of hunting.
The greater threat in a couple ways. One, it pits us against each other. But you look at how much energy hunters will spend arguing with themselves relative to how much energy they will spend advocating against these kind of bills and legislation you mentioned. That is such a waste of our energy when it needs to be applied somewhere else. It drives me to tears when I hear it or see it. It's like, people, who cares what someone chooses to hunt with? Who cares if they, whatever it might be within the accepted seasons and everything else. But for some reason, among our community, and it's not just hunters, I see it in other communities in society, there seems to be way more appetite for arguing with each other than trying to promote and defend your community as a whole, or your activity.
Yeah, especially when the hunting community as a portion of the overall population is small and shrinking relative to the overall population. It's now more than ever do we need hunters to rally around each other and agree on the 95% of the things that we all agree on, and march forward and advocate on those. Yep. And maybe leave that 5% for another day, to make sure that we have another day.
Yeah. I'm with you.
I don't know. That's been something that's been bothering me a lot recently, especially after, time in the governor's office and hearing complaints coming in, because nobody calls the governor's office to say what a great
Nobody's
job
happy.
y'all are doing.
Okay, guys, just wanted to bring you a pizza.
Man, you're killing it. Yeah, you guys are killing it.
Need
Good
some
work.
coffee? What can I do for you? No, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Never once got one of those calls.
Dave, you must have seen some of the worst of it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. So it was just an eye opener, absolute eye opener for me.
I will tell you, Randy, what you said though is absolutely correct. One of the things I learned with certainty though, is the importance of not only being part of the discussion, but man, you want to make a difference. Be a respectful part of the discussion. Go into that office or give a call or send an email that isn't a form letter, and that actually recognizes that somebody has an opinion different than you, and is, to be lack of a better term, kind to those people who you're communicating with. And you'll go places. You'll get the next meeting. You'll get your call will be forwarded on. If you're talking to, somebody's, helper, you're going to get to talk to the somebody instead. If you approach it in the right way, you can, individuals have power. If you do it the hard way, not the easy way, not the lazy way, not the call and curse at somebody way, or the cheap internet comment. But if you do it the right way, you're going to make a difference. Individuals can make a difference.
Yeah, I wish I could blow up my Facebook account. John Denver wrote a song called "Blow Up Your TV." I think John Prine wrote it, but if it wasn't for these platforms I have, I'd check out of Facebook. That's like, what's the little memes? No one's mind has ever been changed by ranting on Facebook or whatever it is. It's like, use that energy somewhere else. And it's not so much that I don't want people to disagree, but I see the amount of energy that's wasted. And I don't know, maybe I shouldn't pick on Facebook. Maybe there are other platforms out there, but the impolite.
Yeah, Twitter's worse.
Is it? Oh, I don't. I have a social media group that does my tweetings. That's kind of a disclaimer in case anything ever goes up.
So do I, Randy. Yeah, I like that. That's good. Yeah, I'm not responding. Nothing I post on social for any of you who are friends of mine is mine, actually. Somebody else does that for me.
But I just look at how we interact with the anonymity of a keyboard and how much energy we spend beating on each other in ways that we would never do that if it was one of you had made mention about, if it was the neighborhood barbecue or it was whatever. I don't know. I'm protesting that. And at some point, the highlight of my career will be when I get to the point where I can delete my Facebook account.
That means you have retired.
Congratulations.
Well, I think with what you're doing, you're going to need it. You're going to need it until it doesn't exist.
I know. But retired implies enough money. I'm just going to flat out quit.
Yeah.
Okay. He's an accountant.
He probably has this giant
you probably
plan.
know it.
He knows exactly what he's doing. He's been accounting every penny.
You might want to call my wife.
I got one last question for you. Mm-hmm. This is the last question. And so I have to emphasize that I'm asking this question because we failed to ask it of a guest recently and actually got some email feedback saying, whoa, that's one of my favorite parts of your show. Are you not asking that question anymore?
I sent the email, by the way.
And so I said, no, we actually did. Surprisingly enough, we got some input on it saying this is one of our favorite parts, and you didn't ask the question. Are you not doing it anymore? And I'd say, oh, we completely messed up and forgot to ask it on that one. So I'm making a point to say, no, we're not giving up on this piece. And I'm going to ask it right here. And so this is the Your Mountain podcast. And we're talking about issues around your land, water, and wildlife and everything that's so important to you and to us and to listeners out there. And we always like to ask people, with that in mind, what's your mountain? What's your that place to you that's so meaningful, that's so impactful, that holds that special place inside of you? What's your mountain?
Well, you guys should tell people you're going to ask that well in advance. That's like a deep question.
We've had people break down. We've had people laugh all over the board on this one.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I would say my mountain is my family, and all my family. But I think anyone who's a parent, whether they have one kid or 20 kids, you have to think about what is it that you're doing that makes things better for your kids. And I'm not talking about handing them everything and saying, here, live a spoiled life. For me, my wife and I, we decided we wanted to live in a place with an outdoor rural lifestyle. And that was Montana. And our son, he never played Little League. We fished 60 days of summer. All of our memories, and you look at our photo albums, they're outside doing something. They're, taking our dogs bird hunting. It's walleye fishing. It's whatever. And I just think about how I often at times have to ask myself, well, how did I become the luckiest guy in the greatest country in the world that I get to wake up every morning, look around and say, can you believe this is what my life is? This is unbelievable. Well, I'm driven by, am I doing what I need to do, just like others did to make it possible for me? Am I doing the things I need to do so that my son or his kid someday can get up and wake up that morning and say, can you believe I live in the greatest country in the world and I get to do this? So that's what really drives me in everything that I do. And part of that comes with age, I think. And I don't mean to sound like I'm ancient, but at age 54 and having the opportunities I've had to explore the places and do the things I've done and fish and hunt and meet so many amazing and interesting people, I just have to reflect on, am I doing justice? Am I giving back for all that's been given of me? Because I do feel, to those who've been given a lot, how do they say it? To those who have been given much, much is expected, or however that phrase goes. I believe that. And my wife and I, when we do these platforms that we're on, she's the silent behind the scenes supporter of me being gone and on the road and handling my emails and taking care of so many things. But it's our joint effort that we want to make sure that we're doing what we can, and everybody can do something in some way. And we feel blessed that we're in a situation where we can do this. And whenever I spend time with my son, it comes right back to that of, man, I hope his world when he's 54 gives him as much optimism and pleasure and just gratitude for what he has, not financially, but what this country and its ideas and principles have been. I just hope that's the case. And every day I get up, let's hope that I'm doing my part towards that cause. And I don't know if that's where you go with your question of what's your mountain, but that's the mountain I try to climb every day.
Where we go with it is wherever it takes them. So everybody's mountain is different. I will say, I think you maybe just raised the bar a little bit. So for future guests, this will now be the thing that we send them and say, listen to Randy. This on how to answer your mountain question.
I
don't know. I mean, I was doing a piece last night. We climbed up the crazy mountains here in Montana, and I thought about it a lot today. And you know how we all get in these reflective moments, but it was a piece that was directed towards our military and our veterans. And I just thought about how lucky I am to live in a country that I think is the greatest country in the world. And I get some people want to argue with me about that. And I'm like, whatever, bumps, warts and all. We recognize these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights consisting of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If you can't embrace that and appreciate, one, that we have a country built on that, and that there are people who go out, and it doesn't necessarily, it's not, the people, I think we all have a deep well of gratitude for the people who serve our country, and I know I do. But I also have a huge amount of admiration for people who stand up for those same ideals. And how could you not be excited and thankful to live in this country? I struggle to understand the mindset of some that gets expressed about, oh, this is a terrible place, or gee, we got it all wrong, or whatever. No, we don't have everything perfect, but every day I look around, and the things I get to do, the public lands I get to hunt, the amazing environment relative to other places in the world. I'm a big fan of the United States, and it's expressed in all the things I get to do and the great life I get to lead. And so those kind of things are what drive me back to that thought of the mountain question you just asked me.
Well, I don't think Nephi or I could say it any better as far as our appreciation for family and country and these public lands and these places that we have. So appreciate you expressing that and appreciate all the work that you've done for all these decades and that you'll continue to do to advocate for all these things that maybe sometimes we take for granted, but without people like you and others out there fighting for them, may not have them. So thank you for that. And thank you for joining us today. I want to make sure, Nephi, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Nope, just thank you.
Oh, thank you guys. And I've watched you guys back when you had your other jobs. And I still remember the first time Nephi called me. I can't remember what the topic was about, but I'm like, oh no, I must have really did something stupid today. And within about 2 minutes, my guard was let back down. Nephi was this really easy to talk to guy, and we had a good conversation. And after that, I started following you guys very closely of what you guys were doing. Did you guys call him your boss or what? I'll just say Governor Meade and his policies were really fun to watch. His leadership was very, very well. I guess we all benefited from not just what he did in Wyoming, but he had a leadership role on a lot of things in the West and on a national level. And I know you guys had a little bit of play on that. You may not admit it, but I have a suspicion that you guys had a few words of advice that got added to the mix there. So I thank you guys for doing that.
Well, certainly appreciate that. He was an easy person to work for. Let's just put it that way. Just a great man, a great governor, in my opinion.
Cool. Can I make one final request?
Yes.
Yeah, you bet.
Can you guys figure out how I could be able to come to Rawlins, Wyoming, pronghorn hunting every year instead of every third year?
Yes.
Well,
I've got
you could.
You're an accountant.
You want to? Yeah. Do you want to just hunt with someone? Because I have a tag down that direction this year. You're welcome to join.
Really?
I can always use. Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say let's start getting you in-state tags, but
That'd be hard. I've told my wife that if ever she gets rid of me, which she has plenty of cause to do, she can just forward my mail to Rawlins, Wyoming.
well, we've got
I'm glad we have that sentence recorded because, no offense to our friends in Rawlins, but that might be the first time that sentence has ever been uttered.
This is a great opportunity for recruitment, Rawlins. If you're listening, you should find this guy something that he can't turn down.
I have no connection to the Carbon County Chamber of Commerce or anything
From
like
now
that.
on, you're gonna.
I go there and I think about there's unbelievable walleye fishing not very far away. There's really good elk hunting not very far away. There's really good mule deer hunting not far away. And yeah, so what? The wind blows all the time. And there's not a lot of scenic trees and, classic Rocky Mountain beauty nearby. But they have the frosting on the cake, the best pronghorn hunting in North America. That's all that really matters. I can overlook a lot for that kind of pronghorn hunting.
It's pretty phenomenal. There's actually also some bighorn sheep hunting right in that area. There's some pretty good black bear hunting just south of there. There's a blue ribbon trout fishery both to the north and to the south of Rawlins. In addition to the walleye fishing you're talking about, it really is from a outdoor recreational standpoint and the public lands opportunities. It's a really it's got a great location.
And they have a ridiculously good Thai restaurant. So.
Really?
That is true.
And
it is a phenomenal Thai restaurant.
They have
Anong's. Yeah, Anong's.
I mean, better need.
Yeah, hit them up next time you're there.
But they have Jerry's Donuts. That's
what I'm talking about right there.
Oh, that's true. And Rose's Diner. So there's or Rose's Cafe. So there's
to go to
there's multiple dining options. Yeah,
it's not a full day.
So anyway,
3 meals.
So we can't solve your every third year issue unless you move here or just want to join one of us residents on a pronghorn hunt. But
you let me know those dates, and there's a good chance I could clear my calendar if I'm not obligated in some manner. I know what it is about pronghorn, but it's my favorite thing to eat and my favorite thing to hunt. As much as I love a bull elk bugling in my face, don't get me wrong, that's exciting. But if you told me, Randy, the rest of your life, the only thing you get to hunt is pronghorn in Carbon County, Wyoming, I could probably make do with that.
Well, that's good to know. You should know about me when I do this. It's traditionally more of a cast and blast. You need a rifle, shotgun, and a fishing rod because
sage grouse on the menu.
Shoot the pronghorn, shoot some sage grouse, shoot some waterfowl, and then try and catch some fish.
Man, you got it figured out. That I might be taking notes if I went on a trip like that.
Randy's in. Randy's in. Dave's got
everyone.
Your weekend is now planned.
No, I bring that up just because I think people have a tendency to overlook some of the cool spots of the West, and maybe they don't have the classic mountain beauty, but there's something about the plains of eastern Montana, the prairie, that I find beautiful. I love watching a sunset and a sunrise in the desert country of Wyoming, and they're just, if you look for it, there's something beautiful to be found out there everywhere.
Yeah, no arguments for me. I am amazed every time I go. I went to Kansas last week, and I always had this joke about Kansas, and I'm going to have to stop telling it now. But I always had this joke. I always said Kansas was the state where you could sit on your back porch and watch your dog run away for 3 days. And then I went to the Flint Hills, and I'm like, man, this is beautiful country. And I got out there and I caught a bunch of wipers, which, for those that don't know, cross between white bass and striped bass, and found just this beautiful area in northeast Kansas. And so you're right. There's beauty everywhere, all over this country. And I'm going to stop telling that joke about Kansas. I might pick a different state.
Well, if you need someone to advocate for the benefits of Rawlins, Wyoming, I'm your spokesperson.
Perfect. We'll let the Department of Tourism know. They're always looking for advocates. And on that note, I do thank you again for taking the time out of your schedule to spend this much time with us on this podcast, and look forward to talking again sometime in the future. And for everybody else that's out there listening, if you want more great content like this, please make sure you go out there and leave us a review and leave us a rating wherever you get this podcast. Subscribe, find us on our social media. At It's Your Mountain is the handle for all of that. And then, as always, remember that life is about experiences, so go have one. Remember that life is about experiences, so go have